I'm Eli, if you already don't know me. I work for Sturdy. I'm largely a developer, but I do a little bit of DevOps here and there when needed. And I figured I'd do a talk about tenancy. Just in general, what are the benefits of multi-tenancy versus single tenancy? And if you guys don't know what tenancy is, don't worry, I'll get you up to speed. Or is it a mix? And usually I kind of feel silly for getting these kind of titles when people say, is it a dichotomy, or is it a spectrum? Is it somewhere in the middle? It's always a spectrum. So, all right, we'll just hop right into it. So what is tenancy? I think the best way to understand this pretty easily is through, just buildings, infrastructure. It's basically how your customers live within your infrastructure. So we got 3 examples up here. From the left to the right is single tenant to more multi-tenant. In single tenancy, all the infrastructure is dedicated just to one customer, one tenant. And in this example, it's just a house. The pool is theirs, the walls are theirs, the garage, the electricity, that's all theirs. It's all built for them. All the infrastructure is completely dedicated to them. In the middle, we have more of a mixed kind of tenancy. Sure, the overall structure is shared between a bunch of tenants. People have their own individual apartments in there. But they also do have something that is just their own. What's within their apartments, their kitchen, their bathroom, that is all dedicated just to them. On the right is an example of really what is a truly multi-tenant environment, a gym. Everything within a gym is basically shared. The space, all the equipment, locker rooms and whatnot. Sure, you may have your own locker, and that'd be an example of some single tenancy, something dedicated to you. But overall, a gym is shared. So moving on to what it is technically, and basically these 2 slides, they're identical. Those images down there, single tenant maps just exactly to this. So all those images are basically the same. So what is tenancy technically? It is just how your cloud resources are allocated to your tenants. Are they shared or not shared? So here on the left, obviously we have an app. We got some compute resource out there hosting an app and a database as well. And each of these are dedicated solely to one individual customer, one individual tenant. For the middle, they call it a multi-tenant, but I think it's more of a mixed tenant. It's not truly multi. You see that they share the app, the compute resource, but they have their own databases, and that's pretty much exactly like the apartment example. Sure, they share the whole building, but they do have their own individual resources as well. And on the right is basically the gym. Everything is shared, both the app and the database. So what we're getting into is the problem. Well, I guess the problem that we're really trying to address here is what is the right mix of multi-tenancy or single tenancy for my business? So there's a bunch of considerations. There's some on the business side, there's some on the technical side. Probably the biggest ones here is who is your customer, the customer profile. That will largely dictate which side of the spectrum you're going to be going towards. And anymore, security and privacy are huge. Maybe like 20 years ago, no one really cared too much about them. Maybe about a decade ago, technical people started to care, but now it is absolutely a business concern. You have to address security and privacy up front. Your customers care about it. So for the customer profile, who are your customers? Usually this will point you to, if you're going to go multi-tenant or single tenant pretty clearly. Are they individuals? Are you a B2C business? Business to customers, individual people. Usually that's going to be more multi-tenant. You can't build up all this infrastructure if you have 1,000 new customers a day. It just won't scale that way. Maybe you're more into an account-based thing where, yeah, there's an account, but there's going to be a bunch of people within it. Or are you B2B? You sell directly to a business. Your tenant is the business as a whole. So just going from like top to bottom, obviously the top is going to be more multi-tenant. Where businesses, you could probably get away with single tenancy. But that's not the only consideration you should have. There are some custom demands that customers can have. What if they want their database to be self-hosted? They want it in their own cloud. They don't want their data getting outside, being persistent anywhere but within there. Well, that points us more to single tenancy. You have a single bit of infrastructure per tenant if all your customers require that. And overall, security and privacy, if they're really into it, there's a lot more you can do that points things more to single tenancy. If they don't want the data to even be processed alongside anyone else's data, then you have to split up compute resources, obviously. So those are a few considerations just based on who your customers are, of what side of the spectrum you're going to lean to. Big ones that kind of play off of each other is cost cutting And privacy, obviously multi-tenancy is going to be cheaper. Since you're sharing resources, you can utilize more of them more efficiently. So we have an example kind of down here is that, yeah, we can have a big database with all our tenants in it. We pay, 62 cents an hour for it. That hosts, 4 tenants. And that is enough resources for all of them to, have a quality experience. If we split that out to 4 databases where, each tenant has their own database, but they're not using all the resources in there, we end up having to spend more money per tenant. So that's an obvious, clear case of where cost is going to scale if you go to single tenancy. Beyond that, you got to think of like per instance cost. Not everything is like you don't pay per the resources. You're paying per the instance of something. And a good example of this is in AWS they have secrets, and you just pay a flat bare minimum of 40 cents a month. If you put all your tenants' secret in there, it's just going to cost 40 cents a month. But if you break them out, obviously you're paying that per. So if you get up to thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of customers, that cost can really become quite large. But having the separability is great for security and privacy. I think it's pretty obvious that just multi-tenancy is going to be less secure. You have one point of attack, and also if that gets compromised, it compromises all your tenants' data. You're going to have to write that horrible email that says, hey, all our current customers, your data got leaked. Rather than if you have separate databases, one of them that gets compromised, not near as bad. And also a big thing you'll hear me harp on again and again is multi-tenant access. This kind of gets more into privacy. So I think a good example of this is a bit ago there was some game company out there, and they had, it was a big onboarding, a bunch of people excited. They all hopped on, they created their accounts, put in their credit card information, log off, and then they log back in and they find out, oh, I just got into somebody else's account. And I could see their credit card information. I got, their home address, all of that. And that is a fantastic example of what can go wrong if you have multi-tenant access. The fact that I was able to access someone else's data shows a critical failure across infrastructure and development. So getting more into the technical side, there are considerations just for maintainability and configurability. Obviously, multi-tenancy is going to be easier to maintain. If you have one instance of a database out there rather than per tenant, it's so much easier to maintain. You can even do it manually. You don't need scripts, you don't need anything else. You just have one instance. It has its configuration, no need to worry. But the trade-off there, it's obviously less configurable. When you have a database per tenant, and one of those tenants needs more resources, it's much easier to go and just set those resources sufficient to what they need, or any other kind of configuration change. And it's not purely just databases we're talking about here. You can think of this as any cloud resource. If there's going to be any kind of configuration specific to a tenant in a cloud resource, single tenancy is great for that. So I'll run through these super quick since we're going pretty late, but just general infrastructure stuff. Multi-tenancy, if you are like going for a microservice architecture, it's going to be much better suited for that. You can't bring up, if you have like 100 services and 20 databases and whatever other cloud stuff you have going on out there, that's not scalable for 100 customers. You're going to end up with so much stuff out there. So that's one thing. If you're in microservices, yeah, multi-tenancy is pretty much what you're locked into. More macro, you can do a single tenancy. Nice thing about multi-tenancy is onboarding, bringing on a new customer. It's very easy because your infrastructure is already there. You can think about it as like the original analogy. It's much easier to get a person into a gym for the first time. They just need a new key card, maybe a lock for the door, versus building a whole house for them to be able to live in, and then you can give them the key. So the infrastructure already exists, easy to get them in. One big thing is just being able to audit the configuration that's out there. If you only have a few cloud resources to support your app, and you're wondering, hey, are they all configured as I expect them to, as I want them to? Well, you can just go and look at them. But if you have tens of thousands of different cloud resources, how do you know that they're all in sync and they have the right configuration? Something very difficult to do, and you end up having to write scripts to do this. I'll kind of just get the big ones here. One thing I really do not like about multi-tenancy is all or nothing deployments. If you break production, everything's broke, basically. This is one, where everything's shared, so if it's broke for everybody. And that means outages affect everybody, bugs affect everybody. Yep. Some pros of the single tenancy. I'll just get the big ones here. There's no on or offboarding side effects, which is big. You could think about it just, again, to the original analogy. Bringing up a house and even destroying a house doesn't affect other people's houses whatsoever. If you're bringing up an apartment building and trying to remove one tenant, but you accidentally remove, I don't know, someone else's apartment as well, that's no good. So in single tenancy, it's very, very difficult to have side effects while bringing people on and off. Another big one that I think is huge is just having localized bugs and outages. It's kind of been surprising of how nice this has been to have, because basically the first question you have when there's a bug is, well, who is it affecting? What's probably the root cause of this? And just having everyone separate, it makes it very obvious that, oh, this is an issue with this customer. And if they're the only ones experiencing it, it's not affecting anybody else. We can get a fix out quicker to them, which is very nice. I guess one of the bigger cons of single tenancy, it's kind of harder to scale for a bunch of tenants. If you're going to have thousands and thousands of tenants onboarding and offboarding every month, that's very difficult to do, to bring up and down that infrastructure. And obviously, it's going to require a bunch of scripts and just general code to make it work. So it's not completely in the DevOps infrastructure platform realm that this stuff matters. It also matters for developers. Big pros for multi is that the configuration's simple. You assume this environment, that's all you got to work with. You're not having to work with a ton of different environments. And it's very easy to get production parity with multi-tenancy locally when you're developing, because you only have to bring up one instance. Trying to mirror true single tenancy, where you bring up a bunch of different instances and whatnot locally, can be pretty difficult. Huge con of multi-tenancy is, again, that multi-tenant data access. Logging into the account and seeing someone else's credit card information, that just cannot happen. And especially for our business, it would be disastrous if that ever happened. And it's pretty difficult to do, because logical security is just hard to get right, and it's also hard to test. So for the kind of single tenancy pros, I'd say overall it's just easier to develop with single tenancy. You're not having any of those privacy concerns that we've been talking about. It's just not possible to access another tenant's data accidentally. You don't have to almost even worry about that. It's baked into the infrastructure to separate it out. And migrations are also much simpler. Migrating one big database with who knows what permutation of odd things going on in it is much more difficult than it is for single tenancy. And a huge con of single tenancy, again, is environments getting out of sync. How do we know that everything is configured exactly as we want? That's just something you're going to have to deal with. So moving on, here's kind of our solution. I'm going to go over a few different areas in which we did kind of different tenancy for, and the reasons why we did it and kind of the benefits of it. So in general, yeah, we're a B2B business, so single tenancy makes a bunch of sense. But also in other cases, multi-tenancy with strong separability also makes sense. We really want to get a good balance of cost cutting, but also guaranteeing that we have the security and privacy benefits of single tenancy. So first up, the database. We have one database, so it is multi-tenant, but technically we have a bunch of databases. We have one RDS instance, that's just Amazon's database, but within there we have a bunch of Postgres databases, and each of them have roles on them that lock in, this role can only read this tenant's data. So it's kind of a mixed model there. It's not true single, it's not true multi, a little bit of a mixed model. And the big thing we get out of this is, for high-level stuff, we get the benefits of multi-tenancy. For all the common operations you're going to want to do with a database, they're pretty easy to do. Setting up backups, replicas, general maintenance if you need to change configuration. All that's at just one database, which is super nice. Having to set all that up for X amount of databases would be a giant pain. And we do get the cost cutting of shared resources. So just continuing on, we also still have that single tenancy feel to it due to these separate databases and roles. So with those, we can strongly limit, obviously, what a database connection can access. And basically, the mechanism in which we force this is that there is no multi-tenant access credentials that'll ever get into production. Those just don't go out, period. Addressing one of the big issues with this, as I've said again and again, is environment drift, and single tenancy is bad. We've done some things to really mitigate that with the schema, which is probably going to be one of the areas that you have the most issue with getting, configuration right. We have atomic migrates. It's all or nothing. If something fails, we're not in a partial state. If one tenant fails, we go fix that, and we move on. A huge thing that's pretty neat that we do to verify, like absolutely verify that the schema is as we expect, is we've developed a signature based on the schema using some database introspection. Goes through all the tables, make sure all the columns have this type, this name, all the views are producing this, all of them look the same. And based on that, we get this big old database signature. And with that, we can guarantee that these databases are not out of sync from local development. And since we've got that in, we have not actually had an issue with it, so it's worked quite well. I'm actually just going to skip over this just to save some time. So in general, conclusion about what we went for with the database. Having one RDS instance, very nice for the shared resources, but we also get the benefit of strong tenant separability. Those database connections are only to one tenant. You can't screw it up, basically. Easier migrates in general. And we're actually not locked into having one RDS instance. The way we have this set up is we could totally, if we want, a tenant wants its own complete separate RDS instance, we could do that. Yep. And one of the cons, I think it's more of a pro than a con, but multi-tenant access is difficult. If that's something that's imperative to your business, to be able to access multiple tenants' data for whatever reason, with this setup, it can be very difficult. But for us, that's exactly what we want. So it's a pro or con depending on your business. Just one other kind of annoying bit is that since the backups are done at the RDS level, we can't just bring a backup if something were to go wrong in one tenant's thing. We have to bring up the whole backup, thereby bringing all the other tenants back to that area. So that's one kind of painful thing about this setup. Moving on to how we do Kubernetes. Very similar to the database is that, yeah, it's multi-tenant, but we get great separability that looks like single tenancy. So in this case, we have one cluster, but many namespaces. Each tenant has their own namespace, their own deployments. Everything that they need is within there. That way we can guarantee that all data processing is truly for one tenant. And with this, we also have, there's service accounts within Kubernetes, and those basically can dictate what permissions they have to AWS or whatever your cloud provider is. We have separate service accounts for each of our tenants, so we can further lock down that these deployments, these pods, these whatever, can only access this tenant's other cloud resources, be it Cognito or their secrets, whatever other cloud resource, we can really lock that down. And so why it's actually multi-tenancy is that the base computation resource here are nodes in Kubernetes. So they are sharing the same resources, but they look like they're separate. Just a quick thing, I'm sure you can imagine if you're going to have separate deployments for every tenant, you're going to have a lot of manifests if you're going to write those out. Just one quick thing we did is we just made some templated YAML. Largely, we're able to populate this deploy super quick. I mean, there's other good ways to do this. You could use Helm or CDKs, but this was just a quick and easy way for us to get going. I'm just going to skip over the rest. So, conclusions about this. One really nice thing is we can individually patch specific tenants. If one person's having an issue and we don't want to do a full deployment, we can go and get that bug fixed out super quick, and it's not going to affect other people, which has actually been very, very nice. It's also very easy to set up test environments. Once you've done a single tenancy, you can also have very isolated special test environments very easily. That's basically all the setup work you've done for that works for test environments. Again, the localized outages and bugs has made monitoring very easy to spot bugs, figure them out, get patches out there really quick. Just some cons about this. There is more overhead with this approach. For all those pods out there, they're going to take up some X amount of memory or CPU just inherently. And since none of that is shared, bringing on an additional tenant means that X amount is going to be taken up from your nodes. And also the deployment process can be a little bit slow. Yeah. I think I'll probably just... Yeah, I guess I could go over this. So since we're pretty single tenant overall, that means we have to deal with configuration. Uh, when you're single tenant, that means you're going to have multi-configuration. Every single one's going to need a different configuration, so this becomes another big mess. And again, we solved it with really templated custom YAML. Um, it's kind of a pain, but it's about the only way you could do it. One good thing we did here with secrets is that we do have an AWS secret per tenant. That's a great place for separability. Yeah, we're paying more for that, but we get the benefit of those fine-grained permissions, as I was talking about before, with those service accounts attached to deployments. We can only allow access to individual secrets with those service accounts. So there again, we have some more added security that you can't just go grab whatever secret you want. No, you're locked in to your secrets. I'll probably just skip over this one, but there's the configurator. Yeah. So another big place where we absolutely went for single tenancy is basically just customer access. From the external endpoint all the way down, it's effectively single tenancy. We have DNS entries for each one of our tenants. We don't have a global one. We have application load balancers for each of our tenants. We have individual cognito, which is a user pool, user authentication for each of our tenants. And that goes into our backend, which is obviously for each of our tenants to the database. So through all these flows, we have single tenancy. And what that really means is that it's almost impossible for you to go to a different tenant's data. And there's safeguards at every single level of that. So that's incredible privacy and security benefits we get from that. And actually, it's not always the case that single tenancy costs more. With the Cognito, our user authentication service, you're not paying per instance whatsoever. There's no resource scaling. All it is paying by user, so we can actually get single tenancy for the same price as multi-tenancy. So that's kind of a different one there. Big thing, onboarding and offboarding customers. So obviously we have no existing infrastructure since we're largely single tenancy. So we have to have a bunch of scripts that basically bring up these whole environments, all the resources that we have out there, and we also have to keep those up to date. Manual work just will not scale whatsoever in this. You might get away with it for your first few customers, but after that, you have to go and spend the time to go create scripts to generate all this. Onboarding does take some time, but since we're a B2B business, we're not getting thousands of customers per hour. So that's all right. Spend a little bit more time to get more security and privacy. So for offboarding, this is really where this kind of single tenancy really shines. It's very simple. We just need to go and destroy the infrastructure we've created for them. Yeah, and it's very safe. There's no chance of side effects. If I'm destroying this infrastructure, it's not going to affect any other tenant. There's going to be no outages. I'm not going to accidentally delete their data. And another great thing is it's complete. I can guarantee you if I delete your database, that data is gone. I can guarantee it. So just talking about the outcome, basically how is this working for our business? So in general, we get really good cost savings, but we also get all the benefits of single tenancy. Overall, it suits our customer profile. We're B2B. Single tenancy is the way to go. But we've also cut costs on what is going to be the big ticket items for just about everybody. And that's databases and nodes, compute resources and storage, always. And obviously, I've harped on it all this time, solid security and privacy throughout. A little bit for the technical side. Yeah, we've exchanged maintainability for configurability, which is nice. We can always do self-hosted. We have all the options we could possibly want. Our onboarding, offboarding process really suits our business. And one really big thing that I do like, since I'm kind of in between DevOps and development, is that we don't have to get security right. We don't have those issues of, am I accidentally accessing the wrong data? Am I getting someone's, some other tenant's data? Which is really takes a huge burden off of the developers in general. So just a few takeaways when you're approaching this problem. Definitely start thinking about it early. The decisions you make early on can come to bite you later on, big time. Pulling something apart, service apart, or putting all your tenants back into one can be absolutely painful and probably is going to require some kind of outage of sorts. I'd say in general, shoot for multi-tenancy just for the cost cuttings, but always have the configurability of single tenancy. That really sets you up, and this is more of a development thing, is consider, oh, what if we weren't multi-tenant anymore? What if we went to single or vice versa? That's kind of like the golden place to shoot for. You have all the options you need, but you're largely saving costs. I'd say another thing is free tenancy, free single tenancy. We kind of utilize this with Kubernetes in the databases that it's free to create a different Postgres database for each of your tenants. We're not paying any additional costs for that. So absolutely, if that works for you, why not utilize it? And same with Kubernetes namespaces. It's free to create a new namespace. And also always keep in mind, as you've seen here, is that different cloud resources are going to have different tenancy. We haven't gone single tenancy throughout. You probably won't either. Yeah, that's it. Questions?
So I don't have an infrastructure background, so just for my understanding, when you talked about multi-tenancy, sharing a single database, and you talked about the case where one tenant access data from another tenant, how can that happen? I mean, they are sharing the same database, but they're not sharing the same data, right?
Oh, well, you could absolutely share the same data. If you can imagine all your tenants live within the same schema, the same tables, it's a whole mix of them within there. If you don't have something like row-level security to prevent one connection from accessing another's data, I mean, there's no safeguards whatsoever unless you explicitly go out and put them in there. So yeah, it's absolutely possible that one tenant could access another tenant's data.
Okay, like in me, like the way I'm thinking about it is you have a single database, but you will have a table for each tenant, and then you specify the roles separately, no?
That's one approach that you can do, but you have to go through and create those roles and whatnot. But if you're talking about, so we have these, these standard set of tables, and you're just going to duplicate them per tenant. Is that what you're trying to describe there?
I'm just, okay, like in the use case I have in mind is like each tenant is storing their own data in each table separately. Mm-hmm. That's the use case I'm thinking of. But
yeah. I mean, yeah, you could do that, but it's also possible that you have all of the tenants' data
in one table.
In one table, yeah.
So in the case of multi-tenant, do you have like security measures that is more than single tenant? Like how do you mitigate the risk of having a single entry point essentially?
Not many. There aren't many. I mean, there's fewer security options just inherently with multi-tenancy. It all basically comes down to roles once you've got there. You could do role-level security. Well, you're pretty much forced to. You could also do a schema per tenant. You could do a Postgres database per tenant. So, but you don't have that option of saying it's in an entirely different database. Okay. Yep.
Thanks.
Just a quick question, I guess, related to costs. So it seems like one of the big benefits of using multi-tenant is, you get to save a little bit of money, which could be really important when you're like starting a company. If that's the case, like I guess at what point do you want to transition over to like single tenant when you are able to do that?
Well, I'd say largely you have to really consider this from the beginning. I mean, what is important to you from the very beginning? Is it security and privacy, or is it cost cutting? As I said in kind of like the wrap up, it's really hard to migrate. So largely you might be kind of stuck into your early decisions. I'm not saying it's impossible, but it'll be difficult. And the longer it goes on, the harder it'll be. But yeah, I mean, if you're asking, hey, we don't really need the cost cutting anymore, but we want the benefits of single tenancy, it's something you can absolutely do. I mean, you're not absolutely stuck. It's just going to be difficult. And you have to weigh that. Does privacy now matter more than cost cutting? And if so, yeah, got to put in the time.
Yeah, and when you like make that decision to go either single or multi based off costs, like do you consider like the legal impact of like potential security breaches and things like that? Like I guess what goes into that cost analysis?
Oh, so many things. I mean, yeah, legal, maybe just your customers, they are requesting it. They're saying, no, I won't sign on unless I'm in my own database, period. This is not acceptable to me. That so much can go into it, genuinely. And it'll be apparent when those concerns become very limiting to your business, I'd say. If that's all, we can wrap up a little bit early. Thank you, guys.